Have you ever felt like giving up? I know I have, that things are just too hard, too complicated, or your life is never going to change. My guest today hit that wall, but today she says she's found a peace and a joy that keeps her going. Sarita, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Cheryl.
So what was it that you hit that bottom? I know you were married, you and your husband were addicted. Tell me about life, what life was like in those days.
Life was very difficult. It just felt like nothing was going right in our lives. Everything was just falling down around us. We couldn't keep our heads above water financially. We were both working and employed, but life was just hard.
When I say you're addicted, you were both addicted to crack cocaine. Like this wasn't a small addiction.
No.
So how was that driving things?
Oh, that was very difficult. We ended up losing everything. Ended up losing everything and having to start all our lives all over again in Massachusetts.
And you didn't just lose everything. You ended up losing that marriage, being a single mom, 3 kids. Tell me about that.
That was a very difficult time in my life too. I managed to stay employed, also managed to miraculously, by the will of God, educate my children. My 2 sons, they actually were enrolled in private schools, went to private boarding schools during all of this.
Wow, how did you do that?
I just look back and I just say it was God. It was God that opened up those doors.
Now, you were not necessarily somebody who had a relationship with God during those years. So tell me about how you and God were relating when now you say it was God.
I was always brought up in church. I used to sing in church. My mother was director of the youth department in our church, so I had a spiritual background, but I never gave my life to the Lord.
Now, you cried out to God at one point, so obviously because you grew up in that, that was kind of natural for you. So tell me about that conversation.
Many nights, I would wake up in the middle of the night and just fall on my knees and just cry out to God and ask Him for help because my life seemed like it was spiraling out of control.
Now, you said you were a crack addict when you were married. What happened to that addiction? Was that still following through in your single motherhood?
Yes.
Wow. So how do you raise kids on one salary, pay for the crack addiction? You got into some sketchy things, shall we say?
Yes, yes. That was like I said, it was just a dark part of my life. I can't even tell you how I got through it, but I was not honest with people. I told lies, a lot of lies. When you have an addiction, you'll do whatever you can to feed that addiction, and that's what I did.
So you told a lot of lies. How did you get money for your addiction?
Work.
So you worked.
I worked.
There were some fraudulent checks in there too.
There were a lot of fraudulent checks. I used to write worthless checks, return the merchandise to the store and get the money. At one point you could do that. You can't do that today, but at one point you could do that.
And so it took a while for God to respond to you. You're crying out to Him in the middle of the night saying, my life is spiraling down, I'm losing everything. But initially you were kind of like, where are you? So tell me about that, because that's tough.
I describe it as I felt like I was on the side of a cliff and was just holding on with one hand. And just as that one hand was about to let go and I was about to fall to my death, God reached His hands out and He grabbed me.
And He did that through a very special coworker that you were working with who moved right across from you.
Yes.
What was it about him that was kind of piquing your interest?
I just saw in his countenance something different. He was a very young man in his early 20s, and he wasn't like your average 20-year-old. And I just knew that there was something different about him. And he invited me to a revival at his church one night.
So what was that like?
That was awesome. I could feel the Spirit of the Lord as soon as I walked through the doors of the church. And what I experienced that night was people being delivered, they were being set free, they were being healed, and the presence of the Lord was definitely in the sanctuary that night.
Wow. And so you saw something different, but nothing immediately changed. You ended up going with a Bible study with your coworker at lunch because you wanted him to pray for you to be free from cigarette addiction. Okay, tell me about this.
Yes, one day I asked him what was he doing for lunch, and he said he was going to the church for noonday prayer. And I told him, I said, with a cigarette in my hand, I said, you know what, I need to stop smoking these cigarettes. So he invited me to come along with him.
And what happened?
I was set free and delivered. When I walked into that sanctuary, the minister who was there, her name was Pastor Jessie White, and she came over and she started praying for me. And the next thing I remember, I was being helped up off the floor, but I remember feeling different.
Wow, what changed then after that? You felt different.
Yes. My whole life changed. Everything about me changed. From that moment when I got up, I left my cigarettes and my lighter there on the chair. And from that moment on, I knew I had been touched by the Lord.
Wow, that's amazing. What would you say to somebody who's kind of where you are, feeling like my life is going nowhere and I don't think I can ever change?
I would tell them to call out to God. Jeremiah 33, the Lord says, call unto me and I will answer you. And even though I thought God didn't answer, He answered my prayers, and God will answer their prayers also. But He wants us to come to Him under our own free will.
Thank you so much for coming to share your story today. You are a transformed woman. We so appreciate hearing from you. And transformation is possible. If you need some hope today, if you feel like you're where Sarita was and you just want to know that there is hope, please give our prayer lines a call. That's why we have them. It's 1-866-273-4444. Here's Robbie Simons now talking about prayer.